Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, June 9th, 2021. It is a brand new show, unless, of course, you're listening to this via podcast, in which case it's either at least a few hours old or is from last year. But for right now, it isn't. It's brand new, and, we'll be rounding up the news to prove that it's brand new. But, again, that proof only works for a short amount of time. So be sure to get your show fresh out of the oven whenever you can. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Bill says so, and that makes it true. But as he says in his morning tweet, the joke's on me, Kagro X, David Waldman. Why? Because he, Bill, just signed a new law that says that after my radio show, he gets to nullify it and change it to Billy in the morning, and he wins all the radios. And why not? It's a fun and powerful position, being governor of Florida, even though you are, of course, a resident of Maine. What difference does it make? You can just declare whatever laws you want. Very easy to do down in Florida. He's enjoying doing it immensely and already running for president, of course. Happened to see just this morning about the same time, and maybe this is even what motivated it. I guess Ron DeSantis down in Florida, in addition to declaring that I guess the coronavirus pandemic is over enough anyway, for him to stop telling anybody anywhere whether or not anyone in Florida is contracting coronavirus and how many of them there might be. He has similarly injected himself again into local politics because, of course, this is the party of limited government, small government. Apparently, the Jacksonville authorities, Jacksonville, Florida, had for June Pride Month. It's not that we're all proud of June, of course, but it's, what are we calling? I think the shorthand now is just saying Pride, but, you know what kind of Pride, except that there's 1,000 letters now. But I think we're still more or less, I think you're still safe just saying LGBTQ Pride, but, you never know. They could be adding letters to this at any minute. But at any rate, they lit up the Acosta Bridge, named after CNN's Jim Acosta, I'm sure, and that's why that irritates Republicans down in Florida. It's not, but lit it up in, the familiar rainbow scheme that goes along with the flag, or is derived from the flag. Anyway, the administration of Governor DeSantis has apparently ordered the city to stop lighting up the bridge in fun ways that make it interesting and attractive and make people pay attention to Jacksonville and want to go there and spend money or what have you. That can't be done. Because someone will find out that you're allowing somebody somewhere to be proud, and that can't happen. So thanks to Governor DeSantis for inserting himself into that. There are a couple other places that I think Ron DeSantis could and should insert himself into, and many of them, at least the one I'm thinking of, is under his own bodily control. So I guess he can insert himself there at any point without implicating the liberties of others, let's say. And, I hope he'll get to work on it real soon. He's so fun. It's always a pleasure to find out something stupid that he's done. All right, we'll tuck that one away. And I've retweeted it, and we can put it into... while Ron DeSantis is inserting himself in various places, we can insert that into our daily roundup of news items. We will supplement our regular guest attendance here. Greg Dworkin will be joining us shortly with his Raft O stories. And, of course, there's a floater in the river with Armando as well. He's got something that he wants to join us in speaking about. And it'd be a great time to have him intervene on this. A lot of talk, and the talk of the internets almost exclusively, except for 800 other things, is a Justice Department policy. We began to touch on this yesterday because I think everybody's talking about it. There's now 3, 4, 5 instances of decisions being made under the Biden administration, the Merrick Garland Justice Department, well, they just don't make any sense. And we're trying to explain them away in the best we can by saying, well, there's certainly an institutionalist bent in the DOJ. And to some extent, that is true, and they really do such things. But it's Armando's opinion, and I'm not far off on this one. Let's see if he can convince us all that it's certainly not all entirely necessary. And there is a significant amount of discretion in these things. And there's clearly something that Merrick Garland is steering. He's a fairly conservative person when it comes to, appellate law in general. And that is no doubt coloring what's going on. But I think there's plenty of room for differentiation, and a lot of former Justice Department employees agree. And so does Armando, not a former Justice Department employee, but we could have him play one on the radio. So for now, Greg Dworkin, any departments you want to take over, you're free to do it. Doors open for you. Good morning, and what would you like to be secretary of?
Good morning. I would like to be secretary of the Internet.
We can make that happen. I think it's at the point where we can just declare that right now.
Right. Also secretary of weekends.
Oh.
And, I think I might even do a secretary of retirement. That's kind of attractive.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And a burgeoning area of study for you.
Right.
Very good.
So a lot going on. Let's do some lightning round stuff.
All right. Secretary of Lightning. I'll call him.
Yeah, secretary of lightning rounds. So you may recall, if you listened to the show on Monday, we had a chat about flag marches in Israel.
Yes.
The origin of some of the right-wing parties there.
Sure.
And the fact that it was something of a provocation. And it was temporarily put on hold because the immediate provocation last time wound up being a mini war between Israel and Hamas. And so the government said, no, you can't march as a provocation through the Old City Muslim Quarter on your way to the Temple Mount because you're doing this to stir up trouble, and you can't. So you'll have to figure out how to get to the Temple Mount some other way. And the party who was really trying to organize this is a right-wing party with extensive roots dating back to some American-Israeli terrorist roots. I mean, real bad stuff with Meir Kahane. And that's where it stood. And we talked about it on Monday in terms of it being a deliberate provocation that might turn out to be a January 6th type of event.
Yeah, okay.
So this story that I'm going to follow up with is from Haaretz today. And it says, the clash over Jerusalem march may create a post-Netanyahu government's first crisis.
Okay.
And the interesting thing in the article is that the person who was pushing to let the march happen was Netanyahu. Because he wanted to have a violent clash, which he figured would help him stay in power. Yeah. So the idea that I advanced that this might be a potential for a January 6th style event, in fact, is being covered in the Israeli papers as a planned January 6th style event, which I think is kind of interesting. And then what happened is it was ruled, whoever rules these things, that no, you can't have the march. The Public Security Committee said, no, you can't. And so now what's going to happen, timing-wise, is that instead of the march happening tomorrow, the next event that happens is Sunday when the new government is sworn in, and then the march is going to happen next week. So instead of it being a provocation to keep Netanyahu in power, it becomes the first crisis of the new government.
Oh, well.
Because, never let a crisis go,
right.
Unused, uncovered. You always have to make use of one. So it'll be interesting to see how that's handled. Talk about justice departments and with new ownership, what do you do with the previous policies that have been put in place and, have institutional backing, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to turn on a dime and then do everything different. Well, sometimes you are, and in the case of the U.S., it isn't just on a dime because it's been several months. But, I'm not the one qualified to do that, so having Armando's take on that would be most interesting. I just thought it was an interesting parallel for those who are following along at home.
Okay.
And here at home, the one of the big interesting topics, of course, is the pandemic, as well as January 6th, which is the topic of my pundit roundup this morning.
Oh.
But in both cases, what's happening is the Republicans are doing their best to try to pretend that neither happened.
Okay.
In the case of the pandemic,
yes.
You were talking about Florida and DeSantis and Greg Abbott in Texas and several other Republican governors are basically saying, okay, it's over, it never happened, we're opening up, it's as if it never existed, and by the way, if all the public health people want to quit, that's fine by me, who needs them?
Yeah.
They made up the whole thing anyway. And, that may or may not work in the long run, but in the short run, that's part of how they're trying to manage the political damage and fallout from the pandemic, which in the end is going to be futile because it's going to roar back. Here's Axios on the one hand. CDC, severe COVID cases, deaths plummeted in the spring following the vaccine.
Hooray.
The data bears it out. Greater vaccine coverage in the U.S. is correlated with a precipitous drop in the number of people getting seriously ill. So for those who were not helping us get vaccinated, that was bad. And for those who were helping us get vaccinated, that was good. In fact, Biden ought to take a lot of credit for one of the great things that happened. Now, that annoys Republicans because they figure it will hurt them politically. So their move is to say, well, Trump was really on top of it all along because look how he knew that the virus came from China.
Yes.
Well,
China
it did
called
come from
and told
China,
us,
but how did it come from China? Well, that's not important. The important thing is he came from China. It came from China, and he was racist about it from the beginning, so therefore we were right.
Yeah, right. He played chopsticks on the piano, so thanks.
Something like that. So that's part of the background for why their attitude is so weird, and we're going to get to that because I think a lot of this is wrapped up in this really fascinating article by George Packer in the Atlantic, which came out last night, which I thought more people were talking about even than Biden's Justice Department.
Oh.
In the U.S., says the New York Times, which is the other side of the coin, the Bitcoin. In the U.S., hospitalizations are rising in areas with low vaccination rates.
Why would that happen?
So the coronavirus might be receding in much of the United States, but it continues to spread in communities with low COVID-19 vaccination rates where highly contagious virus variants pose a threat to those who have not had shots. In Smith County, Tennessee, for example, where only 20% of people are fully vaccinated, there's been an almost 700% increase in hospitalizations over the past 2 weeks. In Truesdale, Tennessee, only 23% of people have had 2 vaccine doses. Hospitalizations have also surged by 700% in the same period, and the increase is not a coincidence, said Ted Delbridge, Executive Director of Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems. People who become ill with COVID-19 now are in most age groups twice as likely to end up hospitalized as people who got the virus earlier in the course of the pandemic. In other words, the variants are worse. They're more contagious and they're more deadly.
Maybe the people are worse.
Well, the people are the same. Some of them have always been bad.
Just checking.
But, that's part of the deal here.
Something's clearly worse.
Right? In Michigan, one of the few states that saw a surge in cases this spring,
yes,
the Alpha variant struck younger people who were returning to school and playing contact sports. And because it's more transmissible, the virus finds cracks in behavior that normally wouldn't have been as much of a problem. You may recall at the very beginning of the pandemic, we had a whole show discussing how you name these viruses and why people try to avoid naming them from where they're from.
Right.
So what the scientists do, because, basically they didn't want to encourage anti-Asian or anti-Mexican in the swine flu situation with flu. They don't want to encourage that sort of thing. So the scientists have been using numbers, but the numbers are pretty incomprehensible to most people.
Yeah.
So now what they do is they call them by the Greek alphabet. So there's the original
that
virus.
Clears things up.
The OG virus.
That
hit the United States. Then there was the Alpha variant, which is the one identified in Britain, more transmissible.
Okay.
Then there was the Beta variant. Okay, the Gamma variant, coming from South Africa and from Brazil.
Right, turns into the Hulk.
And now we have the Delta variant, and that's the one that's seen in India. And it turns out
Welcome,
that
Delta.
from what information we have, and I gave you a little graphic about that, that's sort of toward the bottom, kind of colorful, looks almost like a flag.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Yeah, so kind of cute there. But basically, the vaccine works fairly decently with most of the strains, at least that have been studied so far, and a lot of them haven't been studied. But the variants do have differences in terms of their transmissibility. The Delta variant from India is actually the highest. They have
Congratulations.
differences in disease severity. And again, in terms of that, the Delta variant is one of the highest. And so these variants are really well worth watching, and that's why they're called variants of concern.
Oh,
And
yes.
hopefully there's no epsilon. Hopefully there's no others, but there will be. And so that's something to keep track of. So when you have the combo of areas that aren't vaccinated and these variants making the rounds, what you do is you increase the chance that you're going to wind up having even more mutations and even more variants because you haven't stamped the virus out. So this is one of the situations where it looks good, but under the surface, there's still cause of concern. And this goes back to the whole thing. Well, why are you still wearing masks? It's over. Well, no, it's not over. I know you want it to be over, and Republicans have declared it over, and people are demanding that it be over.
Yes.
And a lot of people would really prefer that it be over, but it's not over. And so you're still going to see a lot of people wearing masks.
Okay. Well, I do see them. Makes sense to me. And I like the little key that they included for their figures, too. I'm having difficulty trying to understand what the gravestone that says RIP is supposed to stand for in this.
It's more deadly.
Oh, really? they couldn't
It's
get
more deadly,
more
and then the one that has a
explicit with
picture
this?
of a hospital means that you're more likely to wind up in a hospital. I
Right.
mean, they try to be as simple as possible with these
Yeah,
things.
geez. Okay. Well, gee, I thought maybe the rotting
Good pick
corpse
value.
one wasn't available. So they really hit you with that. So, okay. Yeah, not looking real good.
Some of those graphics for politics,
Yeah.
when somebody comes out with the idea that,
Yeah, we never do that.
maybe Trump was really in charge of the vaccine all along. We could have a zombie,
Oh, yeah.
sort of thing, or
Right.
zombie ideas that don't ever seem to die, or
Right.
trickle
Or
down
like a
economy gets
cuckoo
3 zombies,
clock,
that sort of thing.
maybe. Or one of those things where a Bugs Bunny character gets hit over the head and there's planets and stars circling them.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, we're doing this again to ourselves. Yeah, that's that sort of thing. So anyway, that pandemic circulating around, I think, is still, of course, in the news. And again, it's one of the
good.
things that Republicans are working really, really hard to try to make vanish.
Yes.
So every time you get mad at what you see about their reaction to in terms of politics, Greg Abbott banning anybody's ability to, for example, you're not allowed to say that you can't wear masks. Well, actually,
what?
you don't have that control over industries or businesses. You can say that about federal places, but, you get yourself in the paper.
Sure.
And that's also true about the election, where you have individuals in individual states. You have governments run by Republicans in individual states who are trying to make the January 6th insurrection go away, but also make the November 2020 election go away, as if it never happened, as if Trump is still president. and so, again, you need to have that's a 4-zombie kind of discussion. and it's important, and that's the background for a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about perhaps after the break. We'll see if we can get to it. Still some lightning round stuff to do. I want to mention the fact that your state, the state we love so much, because so many people there we love, Virginia had some primaries yesterday.
Yes, I had to go out and
do your
swat
civic
cicadas
duty
out of the way. And I voted for, I was accosted along the way, given all sorts of literature by the cicadas. So I voted, actually ended up voting for one of them for lieutenant governor on the way.
Well, that's because we're a big tent.
Yeah, it was really something. I mean, really, it's actually crazy. Have you seen, by the way, that they're circulating the imagery of the weather radar from around here?
No.
On Twitter.
Full of cicadas?
Yeah.
I do know that the cicadas blocked the press plane from following Biden because they got in the engine.
Yeah, really? I figured that would start
I was
happening.
talking about this with Olivia Knox.
Gross.
And I said, look, it's a big tent sort of thing. Just because the activist press is really mad at the cicadas doesn't mean that you can't include them in everything that you do.
Oh, they'll include themselves.
And he pointed out to me that, everything that we do isn't necessarily public. They will pay.
Okay.
Hopefully, I thought in Bitcoin because that just seems appropriate.
Yeah, now a ransomware from the cicadas. They are really thick out here, and they show up on the weather radar, and they have to explain that's not rain in the area. That's just cicadas showing up on Doppler.
Yeah, it's a 17-year bug in our program here.
It is really something. So, yeah, I went to vote.
Literally.
Mm-hmm.
So, Virginia Recap by John Colvillin, who tweets at Win with JMC. He's a pollster and political analyst. Virginia Recap in 2017, you guys peaked out with 543,000 votes. In 2021, just happening now, 483,000. 3 precincts are still out, but there'll be 485,000, just short of 500,000 votes. So pretty good turnout. So the idea that after Trump, Democrats would stay home, In 2009, 319,000. In 2013, 145,000. So this is like the second highest total for a Democratic primary, which is pretty good.
Yeah, not bad.
All 3 statewide winners win by unambiguous margins. Governor McAuliffe won 62%. Lieutenant Governor Ayala, interesting story there, 37-24. And Attorney General is still Mark Herring at 57%. So they solidly won. Ayala was running for Lieutenant Governor. Apparently, I'm not sure the backstory here, something along the lines of having beaten the GOP chair in Virginia in a election at some point in the past. So that guy hates her. And so was trying to run ads claiming that she shouldn't win this because she's now taking money from Dominion Power. And so everybody's mad at everybody else. But in Virginia, basically financing is not really controlled at all. Everybody takes money from everybody. So I don't know that was much of an issue. It was just interesting watching the GOP head try to run against a candidate for lieutenant governor from the Democratic Party, trying to influence other Democrats and how they vote, which is really not going to go well.
Well, it didn't.
And she won.
Yeah, as it turns out. That issue sort of reached me last minute, and I pondered that briefly. What does this even mean? And no good answers.
That's the thing. You hear about it the day before the election, and it's exactly right.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Which, by the way, just a little foreshadowing there. When you hear about things that just happen over the last day, week, or even month, it doesn't resonate the same way as something that's been happening over like 25 years.
Yes.
And so when we get the George Packer's article, about real America and some of the deprivations that are happening in the Midwest to folks, just keep that in mind.
Okay. Fine.
So, we have that. There are articles that talk about the fact that you really have to look less about what's happening in the Congress, as annoying as Republican senators are, and worry a whole lot more in terms of insurrection about what's happening at state level. And we know this, of course, from the crazy stuff that's happening in Arizona. But the fact that Georgia and Pennsylvania are sending GOP representatives to, quote, observe the process, unquote, so that they can try and bring it home is part of the whole issue about how the Republican Party hasn't, and I can't put too fine a point on this, hasn't accepted the fact that they lost.
Yes.
The fact that Trump, as Greg Sargent put it, the big lie that Trump had the election stolen from him is something that Trump tells. But that's not the point. Nobody cares about what he says. The problem is that so many other Republicans say it. And it isn't because they're scared of Trump. It's because they either cynically want to use that for their own purposes, which is to stay in power, or in some cases because they actually believe it. Hard to know which is which.
Yes.
And again, trying to dissect which is all part and process of trying to figure out, exactly where do you stand on this. And And what sort of faction in America do you wind up finding yourself in, which is the thrust of the George Packer article, which is trying to divide America into basically 4 quadrants. Are you libertarian America? Are you, conservative America? Are you smart America, trying to push NAFTA with your college, pointy-headed intellectual ways? Or are you real America, like with Sarah Palin?
All of that. Okay.
And there's a lot of resonance in there, and we'll talk about that after the break. But for now, let's start with the Slate article by William Salatin. Americans are dangerously divided on the insurrection. Too many Republicans support it, and too many Americans don't want to investigate or prosecute it. So it isn't so much that the Republicans insist that Trump won. It's that, look, we're not even going to look. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to mention his name. We're not going to acknowledge that Biden's president. And we're going to work to make sure that, especially in 2024, we get to choose and pick, who the American public really voted for. But we're not challenging you directly about what's happening here. We're just going to, we're not going to challenge you on what happened on January 6th. We're just going to pretend it didn't happen. Because if you look, you'll find too many Republicans are involved. And we don't want that. That's bad for us. The truth is bad for us, so you can't have the truth. You can't handle the truth.
I guess not. Just putting that into play.
You need us on that wall.
What? I guess. Yeah, I mean,
you have to build a wall, and you need us on that wall, and you can't handle the truth, and we're not going to tell you what happened.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's all it is. It seems pretty naked and
oh, it doesn't mean it's going to work, but boy, is it going to be painful.
Well, it's getting annoying. I can tell you that. That's for sure. All right. Well, we'll take a short break and plan out our next segment and return to that right after this. This. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Puzzling over what will be the backbone of the next segment. So, I don't know. I'll leave that to... We'll just all abandon the field entirely and let Greg call the shots on this. He's prepared.
Well, I got 5 articles here.
Yeah, that's preparation.
So, do not try this at home, folks, but I actually read these things before the show. Okay. Scrambling to do it at the last minute because a lot of them are out this morning. But, again, William Salatin, Americans are dangerously divided on the insurrection. On Tuesday, more than a week after Republican senators filibustered and blocked the creation of an independent commission to investigate the January 6th attacks on the U.S. Capitol, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was asked whether he'd call the events of the day an insurrection. I've said a lot about it already. I really don't think there's anything I could add.
Yes or no, sir?
All right. McConnell's reticence and his party's obstruction of the commission are warning signs that American democracy is less secure than ever. Republican leaders continue to promote, excuse, or downplay lies about the 2020 election, and they've reaffirmed their fealty to former President Donald Trump, who, having provoked the January 6th assault in a failed attempt to stay in power, rejects the current government as illegitimate. But the threat goes beyond Trump and his base. Attitudes are fundamentally dangerous to democracy and the rule of law, against accepting election results, against investigating insurrection, against prosecuting perpetrators, has spread to the general public.
Oh, dear.
Okay.
That's us.
So that's why you have, Americans think it was insurrection and don't want Trump to run against, except if he asks Republicans, they say the opposite. So the situation within the GOP writes out in his grave, polls taken in April and May show among rank-and-file Republicans, disbelief in the government's legitimacy has hardly subsided. 2/3 to 3/4 of Republicans continue to say that Biden was illegitimately elected. More than 60% say the election was stolen from Trump. When they're asked who the true president is, most Republicans say Trump. And more than 30% of Republicans reject the basic premise of democracy that the loser in an election must concede defeat.
I see.
Okay. And why would that be? Well, again, not to put too fine a point on it, Tom Edsall writes, determined to enforce white political dominance in pivotal states like Georgia, Arizona, Texas, and North Carolina, Republicans are enacting or trying to enact laws restricting the right to vote, empowering legislators to reject election outcomes, and adopting election rules and procedures designed to block the emergence of multiracial political majorities.
Yes.
So basically, that's why they're doing this. Republicans see the wave of demography coming, and they're just trying to hold up a wall and keep it from smashing them in. William Frey, a senior fellow at Brookings, told CNN's Ron Brownstein, it's the last bastion of their dominance, and they're doing everything they can. That's because, they're losing in sports, they're losing cultural wars, and they're losing elections and getting them upset. And so, that's why they're doing what they're doing. And, Edsall documents a lot of the stuff that we know is already happening. Virginia Gray, political scientist at the University of North Carolina, argued in an email that for Republicans, the strongest factors are racial animosity, fear of becoming a white minority, and the growth of white identity. She noted that Tucker Carlson of Fox News articulated Republican anxiety during a show on April 8th. In a democracy, one person equals one vote. If you change the population, you dilute the political power of the people who live there. So every time they import a new voter, I become disenfranchised as a current voter.
Okay.
Right?
No.
Trump, Carlson, and their allies in the Republican Party, Gray continued, see politics as a zero-sum game. As the U.S. becomes a majority-minority nation, white voters will constitute a smaller portion of the voting electorate, so in order to win, the party of whites must use every means at its disposal to restrict the voting electorate to their people. Because a multiracial democracy is threatening, Trump supporters will only fight harder in the next election. So the idea that they'll suddenly accept the inevitable, not so much. So that's pretty ominous. How does that work at the local level? This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They have a political column called The Jolt. Georgia state senators tore sham Arizona ballot review. News and analysis from the politics team at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Right, that's good. They
and what they're saying here, time and time again, a faction of leading Georgia Republicans have shown they're more focused on relitigating 2020 than tough campaigns waiting for them in 2022.
Okay.
Right, and they talk about how this might affect the next election cycle, and the people being elected are true believers in the Trump lie, in the big lie. So again, that's one of the reasons to focus on what's going on at state level rather than federal level. And that's why I'm a lot less concerned about Joe Manchin and a lot more concerned about what's going on in the states. Now, how is that working out? This is Josh Kraushaar writing in National Journal. Remember, Kraushaar is a conservative who's generally sympathetic to the Republican Party while trying to appear neutral as a data journalist. Just that's his background.
True.
You could tell that because, whenever anything happens that says, "Oh, crime is an issue," you guarantee you're going to see it in Kraushaar's feed.
Yeah.
First thing he's going to tweet. So, against the grain, Trump is sabotaging the GOP Senate prospects. The fact that he's like that makes this all the more interesting. The former president's growing involvement in primaries is jeopardizing Republican chances of winning back the majority.
Okay.
Right? And that is okay. Former President Trump could have been an important asset for the GOP, turning out voters as it seeks to regain control of Congress, but out of office, he's continuing his destructive behavior, endorsing weaker candidates, squelching the campaigns of erstwhile allies, and elevating not ready for primetime contenders in must-win Senate contests. I'm thinking about North Carolina, for example. He probably wanted Lara Trump to run. She's not going to run, his daughter-in-law. But he absolutely stepped on Pat McCrory trying to make a comeback.
Yeah.
Elevating some guy you never heard of to be his nominee.
Awesome.
For example. His erratic behavior since losing the presidential election, exemplified by his conspiracy theorizing and suppression of the GOP vote in Georgia Senate runoffs in January, I would add, let alone what kind of pants he wore when he went to the convention.
Right.
Handing Democrats a majority in the Georgia Senate runoff, and again, he's emphasizing this didn't work in Georgia. That's why the Democrats have the majority in the Senate by however slim a margin there. It's only accelerating as the midterms draw closer. It's leading to increasing Republican pessimism about their chances of retaking the Senate, even as the political environment is awfully favorable on paper to the party out of power. Why is that? Because it's always been. There's really nothing on paper that favors this particular Republican Party, but people like to say that because that's conventional wisdom.
Well, recycled paper. That's good.
Yeah, that's true. When he was in office, Republicans were often able to redirect Trump's worst political impulses into constructive behavior. But now that he lacks tangible political power, he's showing little willingness to play ball with party leadership.
Tangerine political power he's got.
Yeah. National Republican Senatorial Committee Chairman Rick Scott made headlines in declaring that the party wouldn't engage in competitive primaries, and he said he hoped Trump would follow suit. But since then, Trump's picked his favorites with abandon, elevating a leading election denialist like Mo Brooks to frontrunner status in Alabama, opposing party-backed Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, urging a political novice like former NFL star Herschel Walker to run in a must-win Georgia contest. And Walker isn't doing that well, by the way.
Well.
We can't let this guy pick our candidates if we want to be in the Senate majority, said a senior Republican strategist involved in Senate races. Right? And Trump's biggest impact has been in North Carolina, where he endorsed conservative Representative Ted Budd, B-U-D-D, at a state party dinner last Saturday over Pat McCrory and former Representative Mark Walker. The endorsement came after his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, declined to mount a bid of her own. Before Trump's endorsement, McCrory looked like a favorite to prevail, but Trump turned that expectation upside down with the surprise endorsement of Budd. At the very least, Trump's intervention is sparking a nasty round of party infighting.
Well, that's good. I'm for that.
And McCrory said, well, that's because Mark Meadows intervened.
Oh.
So now they can fight amongst
themselves. That's a good play. I like that. You can't blame it on Trump.
Yeah, so you blame it on Mark Meadows. And the North Carolina intervention is merely the latest sabotage from the former president. Last month, he slammed Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich, who apparently is missing a vowel somewhere here, Brnovich.
Okay.
That's probably the proper spelling. No insult intended, but every time I read it, I just look and make sure I'm reading it right. Seen as a top contender for the state Senate race, as lackluster for not joining other state Republicans. And by the way, I come from a family where nobody could spell your name, so I get it. Sure. In entertaining conspiracy theories about last year's election, his endorsement of celebrity supporter Herschel Walker in the Georgia Senate race all but froze the field against Raphael Warnock, even as the former running back isn't showing signs of laying the groundwork for the big-time battleground race next year.
Okay. I mean, for him, but don't tell him.
The key to do nothing to provoke him. There's a big difference between Trump endorsing somebody and trying to kill you.
Right. Yes. I'll agree.
The trick here is not to piss Trump off, said the GOP strategist, offering advice to challengers running against the Trump-endorsed candidate.
Okay. I guess so, and I guess that's what McCrory's doing.
Calling me now, trying to get me to contribute, and I'm not going to do it.
Or...
The strategist acknowledged that going against Trump's choice, given his near-perfect endorsement record in GOP primaries, is a tough challenge. His fight with Murkowski also puts the party in an awkward position, given that the NRSC has already backed the battle-tested senator from Alaska, but though she faces Trump-aligned GOP opposition, Murkowski's political fate is more secure because of new election rules in Alaska. They're doing ranked voting there now, I guess, right?
I don't know.
Where all the candidates run on the same ballot in an all-party primary before heading into a ranked choice runoff.
I could see that. Very interesting, the spread of ranked choice and other alternatives all of a sudden.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Republicans are also watching the Missouri Senate race nervously. Scandal-plagued former Governor Eric Greitens.
Worse. Yes, right. Grattan, I think.
I was happy when you didn't have to know how to pronounce his name.
Yeah.
I'd already hired top Trump campaign official and Don Jr. girlfriend Kimberly Guilfoyle as his campaign chair.
I guess she is less likely to object if he gropes her.
Right. Missouri is a reliably Republican state, but Greitens' baggage is so extensive that his nomination would potentially put the race in play. Senate Republicans need to net just one seat to win back the majority, and they should have a decent opportunity to win races. on traditionally Republican turf in Arizona and Georgia, but their lackluster recruitment so far has given Democrats a head start, largely thanks to Trump. Here's the GOP dilemma. Republicans can't win with Trump playing a central role, but they can't win without him. Their strategy throughout the year was keep Trump in the party tent, hoping to influence his behavior, but so far that plan isn't working. Trump is more interested in reshaping the party in his own image than helping the GOP win back control of Congress. And yes, I know everybody's sick of this, but, you can't help but remember, well, don't worry about Hitler running. We can control him.
Yes.
And how did that work out? Not well.
Not so
if
far.
Republicans aren't willing to fight for their own interest, they'll end up surrendering not just to Trump, but to the Democrat control of Senate. Well, that's okay. I'm all right with that. I'm all right with all of that. But, what I'm not all right with is surrendering to Trump because you think you're smart enough and smarter than his supporters, and therefore you can wind up controlling. That just never
ride this
ends
tiger.
well.
Okay.
Never does. And this leads me to a couple of articles, one of which was pointed out after I posted the George Packer article in the Pundit Roundup this morning.
By Green Bay
somebody
Packer.
pointed out, this has been going on for a long time. This is a piece from The Nation, before I get to Packer, that was posted by Kirk Nodin in November of 2016.
Okay.
Why do white working class people vote against their interests? They don't.
Well, all right then.
Corporate Democrats have never advanced their interests, and at least Republicans offer a persuasive story about why they're getting screwed. Right?
All right.
At least Republicans offer a basic and misleading story, he says. When I first started organizing Youngstown, Ohio, many people told me I must read Sean Safford's Why the Garden Club Couldn't Save Youngstown, which argues that Youngstown collapsed as a result of a lack of social networks. It's an absurd explanation for what happened to the city, but embraced by many thoughtful progressive leaders there. In fact, Youngstown has been left hobbled because progressive failed to secure economic power. The first step was the collapse of the industrial heartland. This hit white working class people incredibly hard, and it remains a phenomenon that is not understood on the East and West Coast. That's what I meant about sometimes things that take place over 25 years have a lot more salience than, I just saw a commercial the day before the primary, and that's somehow going to change my 25-year thinking.
Okay.
It is painted as a natural evolution, he writes, of our economy, and as if the onus is on people to adapt to it. This fails to capture how many families and communities were dependent on the industrial economy. Many Ohioans are now staring at a future where they themselves and their kids have less opportunity than their parents. In a place like Youngstown, that means not only an inability to get a well-paying job at the steel mill, it also means owning a house that's failed to appreciate in value for 20 to 30 years, in a city that continues to lose double-digit percentages of its population every 10 years. It's not just the stripping out of economic opportunity, but a stripping away of identity for those communities. It's the sense of abandonment, perpetual decline that people feel mired in. I don't know if this particular article references the opioid crisis, but you can throw that in too. Resources, jobs, decent housing, quality neighborhoods, and schools are all in decline. It creates a scarcity mentality for white working class people and others who live in the heartland. Two narratives emerged about the collapse of the industrial heartland in America. The one from the far right has three parts. First, industry left this country because unions destroyed productivity and made labor costs too high. Second, corporations were the victims of overregulation and a bloated government that overtaxed them to pay for socialist welfare systems. And third, illegal immigration has resulted in the stealing of American jobs, increased competition for white workers, depressed wages. Together, these three factors led to the collapse of manufacturing in America, and this, sadly, is a story many Americans believe.
Even though they don't see the immigrants working in that steel mill, I guess they believe it.
But, again, you have to flash forward to Trump winning and flash forward to 2021 and realize that those voters that voted for him still support him for reasons. And as many of the other authors that I was talking about in terms of worrying about American democracy are citing, yes, it's race, but it's not completely race. There is an economic anxiety part of this. And that's what this is describing. The second narrative promoted by corporate Democrats is that the global economy shifted and the country is now in transition from an industrial to a knowledge-based economy. This story tacitly accepts the economic restructuring of the heartland as inevitable once China and other markets opened up. But the most accurate narrative is one we never hear. And that, I think, is illustrated well in the collapse of Youngstown steel mills. When the corporations who operated the mills shut them down, the community organized en masse. Key religious and community leaders stood up against the severe consequences. A coalition organized after a feasibility study showed the reopening the mills was economically viable. The coalition appealed to federal government for loans to purchase and modernize the plant. Carter didn't do it. He was worried that supporting the project would jeopardize his reelection bid and bowed to lobbying by steel corporations who saw it as a threat, and which was countered only by tepid support from the National Steelworkers Union leadership, who worried worker ownership might undermine the union. And the collapse of the industrial heartland resulted from a choice about whether we would reshape our economic models to serve workers and communities over profits. So sort of an idealized view of why things went bad. But some of the analysis about how people think about it, I think, is spot on, even if, like, this isn't exactly what happened. And it's not as if that would have been a panacea. If Carter had only done these, loans, then Reagan and the rest of everything that happened wouldn't have happened. I don't think it's that simple. But in terms of how people think about it and have been thinking about it since 1976, is pretty interesting. And that leads us to George Packard's article, which is talking about the four Americas.
There were two.
Although we can skip the libertarians for the moment, and then the other strands of the conservative movement in terms of elitist traditionalism and anti-communism, nonetheless, the other two parts I think are pretty fascinating. One of the groups he talks about is what he calls Smart America, which is exactly that. Listen, it's good for you to have this transformation into a global economy, and NAFTA and all these other things that we pass, and all these Bill Clinton-style trade bills are in the end going to help the country, even if it doesn't help you. So suck it up.
That sounds less fun than Smart America usually sounds to me.
Well,
right?
but if that's how your view of it is, you're not going to vote for these people.
Right. That's the unsmart
That's the key
part
there, right? If that's how you view what's going on, simplistic, wrong, or otherwise, if that's how you view what's going on, you're not going to vote for the people who think that the knowledge economy is the way to go, because they think that people like us who get left behind don't really matter, and we're supposed to just like suck it up because they think it's better for the whole country, but it's bad for us.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean,
so that's where a lot of the aggressive populism comes up from.
Yeah.
And the new knowledge economy created a new class of Americans, men and women with college degrees, skilled in symbols, skilled with numbers. This is George Packer writing. Salaried professionals in information technology, computer engineering, scientific research, design management, consulting, upper civil service, financial analysis, law, journalism, the arts, higher education. They go to college with one another, intermarry, gravitate to desirable neighborhoods in large metropolitan areas, and do all they can to pass on their advantages to their children. They're not one percenters, but they dominate the top 10% of American incomes with outsized economic and cultural influence, at ease in the world that modernity created. They're early adapters to things like HBO, Lipitor, MacBook Pro, grass-fed organic beef, cold brewed coffee, Amazon Prime. They welcome novelty. They welcome and relish diversity. They believe the transitional flow of human beings, information, goods, and capital ultimately benefits most people around the world. And you have a hard time telling what part of the country they're from because their local identities are submerged in the homogenizing culture of top universities and elite professions. They believe in credentials and expertise, not nationalistic, but they have a national narrative. Call it Smart America. That doesn't sound very attractive, does it?
No, it sounds a little overbroad in that tent making there, but all right. There's only
it does,
four.
But again, if that's how you view it, rather than that's who you are, but if that's how you view it, you ain't voting for these people.
Yeah, I guess. It just better be how you view it, or else the rest of the article is boring.
Now, the cosmopolitan outlook of Smart America overlaps in some areas with the libertarian views of Free America.
Aha.
Each embraces capitalism, but to the aristocrats of smart America, some government interventions are necessary, and the libertarians don't like that at all. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the libertarians because they're a small faction. I don't really think they matter.
All right.
But of all of them, now politically, smart America came to be associated with the Democratic Party, and this wasn't inevitable, but that's what happened. And it's true that the white South abandoned the Democratic Party after the Civil Rights Revolution, but race alone doesn't explain the half-century shift of working-class white voters. West Virginia, almost all white, was a predominantly Democratic state until 2000. And if you look at county-by-county national electoral maps, 2000 was the year when rural areas turned decisively red. Something more than just the Democrats' principled embrace of civil rights movement and other struggles for equality caused the shift. In the early 70s, the party became the home of educated professionals, non-white voters, and the shrinking unionized working class. And the more the party identified with the winners of the new economy, the easier it became for the Republican Party to pull away white workers by appealing to cultural values. Bill and Hillary Clinton spoke about equipping workers to rise into the professional class, and their assumption was that all Americans could do what they did and be like them. And I would add that he didn't write, and that people would want to do that.
Right.
That's the assumption. Okay, and that's a wrong assumption. Some people just want to stay the way they are.
I guess that's true, but maybe with extra money.
Now, the turn of the millennium was the high water mark of smart America. President Clinton's speeches became euphoric about, moving to the 21st century and all that. In April 2000, Clinton hosted a celebration called the White House Conference on the New Economy. And at one point, Clinton informed the participants that Congress is about to pass a bill to establish permanent trade relations with China, which would make both countries more prosperous and China more free. I believe the computer and the internet give us a chance to move more people out of poverty more quickly than at any time in all of human history. And you can almost date the election of Donald Trump to that moment. Right? The winners in smart America have withdrawn from national life. They spend inordinate amounts of time working, even in bed, researching their children's schools, planning their activities, shopping for the right kind of food, learning to make sushi, play the mandolin, staying in shape, following the news. None of them brings in contact with fellow citizens outside their way of life. School, one of the most universal and influential of our democratic institutions, now walls them off. The working class is terra incognita. And so the pursuit of success, in effect, has alienated and cleaved them from the life of working class folks who are still struggling to get by. Now, again, people will point out and have pointed out one of the problems with this piece is that it completely leaves out non-white, non-college folks in this diagnosis here. But skipping that for the moment, but acknowledging that it's true. He then talks about, again, a very long article about some of the problems that this so-called smart America faction, the worst of the yuppies, the worst of the NIMBYs, you could call them.
My goodness. All right.
Not in my backyard. Smart America doesn't hate America, which has been so good to them. Smart Americans believe in institutions and they support American leadership, but smart Americans are uneasy with patriotism, an unpleasant relic of a more primitive time, like cigarette smoke or dog racing. It stirs emotions that can have ugly consequences. Okay, and patriotism can be turned to good or real purposes, but in most people, it never really dies. It's a persistent attachment, and that's one problem with the narrative of smart America. The other problem is that abandoning patriotism to other narratives guarantees the worst of them will claim it. And that leads us to talk about Sarah Palin. And probably the best part of the article is his next faction and his diagnosis of what's going on there, what he calls real America.
Okay.
In the fall of 2008, Sarah Palin, then the Republican nominee for vice president, spoke at a fundraiser in Greensboro, North Carolina. And again, to digress a little bit, the point of all of that leading up to his real America focus, these are the people who refuse to accept that Trump has lost. That's why it's so important. In the fall of 2008, Sarah Palin, then the Republican nominee for vice president, spoke at a fundraiser in Greensboro, North Carolina. Candidates reserve the truth for their donors using the direct language they avoid with the press and public. Remember Obama saying cling to guns or religion, or Romney the 47%, or Clinton basket of deplorables. Those were statements all made to the donors.
Yeah.
We wanted to know what's really going on. And people, Packer's point is that candidates feel free to talk about their real feelings in front of the donors, who presumably share those same feelings. Palin felt free to speak openly. We believe the best of America is in these small towns that we get to visit and in those wonderful little pockets of what I call real America. Being here with all of you hardworking, very patriotic, very pro-America areas of this great nation, those who are running our factories, teaching our kids, growing our food, and fighting our wars for us.
Yes.
Think about that in terms of that Nation article about what was going on in Youngstown. What made Palin alien to people in smart America prompted thousands to stand in line for hours at her rallies. Her vernacular, things like you betcha, drill baby drill, her charismatic Christianity, the 4 colleges she attended, her children's names, her pregnant unwed teenage daughter, her husband's commercial fishing business, her hunting poses. She was working class to her boots. Plenty of politicians come from the working class. Some of them, I would add, pose as if they're from it. Right. Palin never left it. And she went after Barack Obama with particular venom. Her animus was fueled by his suspect origins, radical associates, redistributionist views, but the worst offense was his galling mix of class and race. Obama was a black professional who had gone to the best schools, who knew so much more than Palin, who was too cerebral to get in the mud pit with her. Now, she crumbled during the campaign, and her miserable performance under basic questioning disqualified her in the eyes of Americans. Her Republican handlers tried to hide her and later disowned her. But because with her candidacy, something new came in our national life that was also traditional. She was a Western populist who embodied white identity politics. She was John the Baptist to the coming of Trump.
Yes, okay.
And again, Packer reminds us, real America is a very old place. The idea that the authentic heart of democracy beats hardest in common people. And that's, again, one of the reasons why Trump voters are having such difficulty giving up the idea that they lost. They understand that losing means change, and they don't want change. So that's why I think it's such an interesting article. And the section on real America, I think, is the one that hits closest to home.
I guess so.
But that's that, and that's my segment. And here comes the break. And so I'll talk to you tomorrow, and we'll see what you have to say about it.
Yeah, right. Geez, now I don't know, and I don't have a chance to do it either. Armando's going to come on and tell me what to think about.
Well, that's the idea. Right?
That's something else. Yeah, really, I probably should have taken a nap.
Play out the clock, and then it's too late for you to comment.
I'm doing it. All right. Thanks, Greg. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I forgot the name of the show briefly, but of course, that's probably largely because I have lost control of it entirely. And I'm ready to lose control of the 10 o'clock hour now, as a matter of fact.
No, I heard the end of Greg's thing there.
Hey, yeah.
And I don't agree. I think that particularly, and you made the disclaimer, I think, at the beginning of the show, that you have a relation who works in the Justice Department.
Oh, yes.
So,
I do.
Frankly, I'm sure you know more about the workings inside than I do.
Well, I don't know.
Do want to discuss things that bother me, yes, of course.
Yeah, right. Well, okay. Well, so set the table again here, where we've got a long list in the last, in the last 2 weeks has been
and
difficult.
There's new things today that people are complaining about where I'll actually defend the Justice Department. One is, you may have heard of or not, that the Justice Department is challenging a California law that limits federal contracting of private prisons in California.
Okay.
The principle there is the state of California can't tell the federal government what to do. I think the Justice Department has no choice but to challenge that law. It's kind of an absurd law.
I guess all you really have to do is imagine it being passed in Texas and think, what would you think about that? Or if it was about vaccine passports or something instead. The state has no business.
I think Texas has something, not that, but it's something about the camps or something. I'd actually look that up. That's a very good point. That Texas and California actually have laws that have similar effect of trying to impinge on federal contracting.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so that's
no
new.
surprise.
And then there's an LGBTQ religious exception case where the Justice Department has to defend the federal law, which is bad, but it exists.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we would want that law repealed, if anybody No, actually think any of these religious exception laws are completely unconstitutional, violation of the First Amendment Establishment Clause. Like Justice Stevens said about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which I think is also unconstitutional. But, I also think the Second Amendment should be abolished. So don't listen to me.
Right, but not because it's unconstitutional, just because it's bad.
No, it's constitutional. It's in the Constitution. It's just bad.
Right. I mean, there's several reasons for wanting things wrong. It's constitutional. It just sucks. That's a legit thing to say. It's just difficult to win. Yeah. All right. Well, there's a lot happening here, and there certainly is. And now there's the meta issue of should you be, even mentioning it. I mean, you have to. It's a real thing that the Justice Department feels institutional pressures. A lot of the pressures, like for instance, the pressure to defend the federal position against California, comes from a different place. But it's similar. I mean, I guess it's got similar roots in that the Justice Department certainly sees its role as defending not just the federal government as a whole, but also the executive branch in particular when it comes to fights with other branches of the same government. But that, and in general, executive supremacy wherever it can find space to defend it, because of course it's also part of the executive branch. It's good for them, and it's good for the president, who makes them who they are. They are the attorneys general and department heads by virtue of having been appointed by this president, and they're usually vigorous in defending him. And then on top of all of that, they are making room for their successors to do the same for their presidents. And generally speaking, having survived some 200 and something years with mostly non-crazy presidents, it's not really been exposed for the problem that it's become now. But yeah, there really is an actual institutional feeling that they need to even defend very bad ex-presidents in order to inure the benefits to themselves.
But look, let's take two of the issues that I disagree with. I think one's more egregious than the other. Let's take the appealing the Bar OLC PR memo that, as just Judge Berman Jackson called it, when she said that it's subject to release because the deliberative process privilege doesn't apply. And just as a quick shot, deliberative process privilege is a created privilege that says that if two people in the government are discussing something to formulate a decision, that can be held confidential in order to promote a free and frank discussion.
Right. Okay.
All right. That's the theory of it. You think that's valuable? I personally don't. I don't believe in that privilege, but it exists, and some people think it's important. That institutionally, you can see the pull to fight there. Though I think that this is just the wrong case anyway, because the judges saw the memo and she has her timeline, and she said, listen, I understand the privilege exists. It just doesn't apply to this memo because when it was made, the decision had already been made. So there was no decisional deliberation. This was an after the fact cover your butt thing. Okay. So he could say OLC recommended to me that I make the decision I already made. And she said it was pretextual. She didn't believe it.
Right.
Now, she could be wrong on the facts or she could be right on the facts. But there's no principle in play here. What you're defending is Bill Barr's story. And I don't think there's an institutional argument that's there. In fact, I think if you read Judge Berman Jackson's opinion, she lays it out pretty clearly that it was pretextual. So what is the institutional interest here? Well, to cover my back because someone's going to go after me years later. So continuity, one AG protects the other. That's not noble.
No, it's actually also quite a bad idea. And if you're having difficulty seeing it, well, I don't know why you would, but if you're having difficulty seeing it, it's essentially the argument that goes, well, I will preserve the filibuster because I'm going to need it against bad Republican moves later on, as opposed to, well, the Republicans will simply make it impossible for me to use it or abolish the filibuster when it's my turn to use it. There's no way that, like, for instance, Bill Barr, I mean, he demonstrated that he wasn't going to give the same deference.
He did not give the same deference, and he was more than happy to release what was traditionally privileged information when he thought it supported Trump. I mean,
sure.
I mean, that's one of the things. Suppose you buy into this scratch your back stuff, and I don't, but suppose you did. This is not, my God, this isn't even Ed Meese for freak's sake.
Well done.
You know what I mean? The Barr was just unprincipled, partisan, and completely disrespectful of the institutional interests. So why is, again, this is cynical, and I don't buy it as a premise, but it just doesn't even work at that level.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't like Garland's judgment on that. And again, there is no institutional interest. There's a personal interest of the people who hold the chairs, having someone take care of them going down the line if they have something they don't want released that they held back. So it's not institutional; it's personal. I'm the AG now, or I'm in justice now, and I wouldn't want someone, taking a poop on my stuff when the next administration is in. Again, that's not an institutional interest. That's a personal interest. So I don't buy it. And even on those terms, I think it doesn't work because Bill Barr was manifestly not an institutionalist.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that even if you buy into this theory at some level, there's also plenty of room for differentiating between, real administrations that actually have institutional interests at heart versus anomalies like the Trump administration. I understand that. I mean, I guess the real problem there, or I guess what the institutionalists would come back with as well, it's virtually guaranteed. It's a certainty that the next Republican administration will view the Biden administration as outrageously criminal and beyond the pale in every respect.
No, they won't.
But I imagine
they would. They may say it, but they won't believe that's just not true.
That might
they
not
know
be
that.
the case.
They know
that
that's
believe
not
it.
True.
That doesn't mean that they don't say it or act on it. And some of them will believe it because some of them are truly crazy. Yeah, but I mean, but that's the point. I think that the institutionalists would say they're trying to make is whether they believe it or not, they are going to say that. And if you can establish a precedent that this is just not done, but this is where it breaks down. We've established those precedents since forever. This is not done. That's not done. And then Trump just did all those things because there wasn't any rule or law against them. And where there were rules and laws against them, he ignored those. And so, I mean, the payoff of this theory has been exposed as a sham. But to return to it and say, but they'll be less crazy in the future. I mean, that's literally one of the arguments, I think. And it was at in the Lafayette Square case, the government argument is, well, it won't happen again. Because, one, Trump isn't president anymore, and nobody will be that crazy anymore. We'll never run into that again. That was a one-time thing, which, if that was if that's true, and I think maybe it is. I mean, I think they have plenty more crazy where that came from. But if it was true, then I would say, well, then you've just distinguished it as an outlier, and I don't need to give them the deference that I give to a normal administration. And I don't need to worry about the precedent it sets because this is a one-off. Thank you.
That's a very good argument. That's a very good argument.
It.
But obviously it's silly because Trump says he's going to run again in 24. Right. So how can you say it's a one-off when
it won't happen again?
Run for president again?
The guy who did it is like, yes, it will. I'm going to do it.
You know, I'm less critical of what Justice is doing there. First of all, it's a pretty bad argument that seems likely to lose as an argument. You know, it'll never happen.
That's true.
Again.
We do have to wait and see if it is totally destroyed.
Right.
They're just saying it.
But I do see the institutional role there, the DOJ, because this is within the scope of employment. They have to make an argument. I mean, it's a lousy argument, and they have to argue something. I mean, they have to be the lawyer for the president and whoever was sued on that case. That's you know, we've assigned that role to the Justice Department. If we don't want the Justice Department to do those things, we should forbid it and say, nope, you're on your own. Justice Department isn't here for that.
And that's the thing we can do.
I'm just saying, at some point, the Justice Department, by dint of the role it's given, has to make bad arguments institutionally. That to me is like the California prisons, the California for-profit prisons federal contracting thing. And though I agree the policy at a higher level is a problem too, but suppose it was, I agreed with the policy or what have you. It's still, the Justice Department has to take that role. Let me switch you to one where they don't, in my view, that is so clear. And that's the Westfall Act case, the one where they're trying to substitute the United States as the defendant in the Jean Carroll defamation case. Jean Carroll, of course, was the woman who was sexually assaulted by Trump at a store many years ago, decades ago. And it came out, and she confessed to it, and Trump was asked about it, and he basically called her a liar, and she sued him for defamation in New York State Supreme Court because they were both at the time citizens of the state of New York.
Yeah.
So there was what's called diversity of citizenship. If you're not a lawyer, you can sue in federal court only if it's a federal question or if the plaintiff and the defendant are citizens of different states and the amount in controversy is in excess of $75,000. So
it used to be $20. I like that.
They couldn't go to federal court. So it was in state court, and they litigated there for a year. She won motion. She defeated Trump's motion. She has a great lawyer named Robbie Kaplan, who is famous for the Windsor case and the same-sex marriage case. Very prominent, very effective attorney. So, yes, she was winning. And you were in state supreme home court advantage for her, though. Kasowitz is Trump's lawyer, at least was in that case, and he's not very good, to be honest with you. So, he was getting beat up pretty good. So what happened? Guess who rode to the rescue?
Am I supposed to be able to guess? I don't know.
Yeah, well, Bill Barr.
Oh, okay. All right.
Bill Barr
that seemed too
the unprecedented step of certifying that the President of the United States, being subject to a civil lawsuit, was acting within the scope of his duties when he called his accuser of rape many years before of lying. That's, in theory, part of the president's official duties.
Yes, you're supposed to tell people.
There's two problems. Number one, no president has ever invoked the Westfall Act. Indeed, that I was reminded of this by rereading the decision by Judge Lewis Kaplan of the Southern District of New York, that Paula Jones actually sued Bill Clinton for defamation as well.
Yeah, okay.
He didn't seek a Westfall Act declaration. No president ever has.
The whole, of course, Well, it's interesting because the whole premise of the Clinton defense was, this has nothing to do with governance. This is a private thing, and you should all not be prying in it anyway. But
that's Clinton v. Jones, and as as I was rereading it, and I just realized, the whole idea. I don't think the Westfall Act actually covers the president. I actually read Judge Kaplan's discussion there, and frankly, I think it's bulletproof. And by the way, this is important because the people defending Garland are saying, well, he's upholding precedent. That's not true. That's just plainly false. Okay. There never has been a Westfall certification for a president, ever.
I guess that's just a matter of record, okay?
Okay, that's just a matter of record. Do not tell me. There's no precedent that you're defending. And actually, if you read the law the way the judge did in the case, you can see that, in fact, the president really isn't covered.
Okay.
At all. He's not an officer of a agency. He's an officer. He's a constitutional officer, but he's not under the definition therein. And and the whole background on that is pretty interesting. And I'm going to lead you back to why the institutional argument should have been that he's not covered by Westfall.
Okay.
But Westfall starts because there was a government employee named Westfall, and the Supreme Court ruled that there's not total immunity under the Federal Tort Claims Act for the individual. It's only partial sort of qualified, right? So they ran out and they created a law in reaction to a Supreme Court decision that said, you know what, we want people like this federal government employee to be immune, and that whatever their liability is will be covered by the government, including their legal representation. Undoing the 1987 or 88 Supreme Court decision in Westfall. That's what they did. Okay. It was very much a one-hit, easy thing. Said, you know what they just did, we're undoing with this law. Okay, so why would the president be covered by that law? You say, well, it could, they were trying to get everybody. Well, no. As Judge Kaplan points out, 6 years earlier, the Supreme Court had ruled in Nixon v. Fitzgerald that the president is absolutely immune for any official conduct he takes as president.
No.
So why would Westfall Act need to undo that? It doesn't. So the key question then becomes, for the president of the United States, he should say in court that, this was in my official conduct and pursuant to Nixon v. Harlow, I'm immune. Well, he did make that argument, and the court rejected it in the state Supreme Court.
Okay.
All right, so that was that. But barged in unprecedented fashion to take over the case and move it to federal court. That's unprecedented. That's institutional abuse. And indeed, it weakens the presidency because it requires that you argue that the president is an employee, that he's a servant to a master.
Yeah, and although there are a lot of people who sort of semi-believe that, not necessarily from a legal standpoint, but just, simplistic. You work for us. We hire you.
Well, but the point is we can't tell him what to say.
Right.
We can fire him every 4 years, but we cannot tell the president what to say. Indeed, the idea is the president is this one branch of government.
The unitary executive.
Right. The president, the current president, could have called Garland up and ordered him not to file that.
Yes.
He could have done that.
Yes. I mean,
he's nobody's servant in the executive branch. He doesn't have what's called a respondeat superior relationship, which is, believe it or not, key to this Westfall Act nonsense. But you have to argue that the president is just a mere servant.
He certainly doesn't have available to him the excuse that I was only following orders.
Right. No one gives the president orders. No one.
I guess that's so.
So the institutional position of actually invoking the Westfall Act for the president is to weaken the presidency. I'll go further. If the president is an employee under this thing, then he should, the Hatch Act, unless expressly excluding him, should include him.
Oh, plus he loses the lease on the hotel. By the way.
Plus he loses the lease on the hotel. Do not remind me of that.
Has to follow, but okay.
No, but really,
yeah.
No, you're seriously, right. David, there's a million dominoes that follow if you take this seriously.
That's a very interesting point. The whole, I mean, they probably wouldn't say it so overtly, but I mean, at the heart of Westfall type protection, I guess, is, well, if you're doing the work of the government, presumably you have been instructed at some level to do this. And while there are limitations on what you can and can't do, and the whole worry about illegal orders, et cetera, sort of carry that over from like military law. But if, in the general course of your work, you are executing someone else's will at the behest of the federal government on behalf of all of us. And so it makes a certain amount of sense to spread out some blanket protection on these folks. But if you're right, there's one person at least in the federal government who takes orders from no one, and to cover him with this sort of blanket without also admitting, well, that must mean he's simply, executing orders somewhere, and then he's now subject to all sorts of other limitations, which you won't accept. It can't follow. It's logically impossible. And,
right. The reality is everybody covered under the Westfall Act has a master, at least as to the executive branch. And that master is the president of the United States. He's not anybody's servant in the executive branch. Everyone serves at the pleasure of the president. Correct? Of course, there's civil service protections, but everybody that he appoints. He's not the servant. He's never the servant.
Okay.
This is, just institutionally, it's a terrible argument for the presidency.
Yeah.
All right?
Well,
so you really, as a matter of policy, if I was President Biden, now that I think about it, I'd say, you know what? You need to withdraw that because I think it weakens the power of the presidency. And in fact, if you don't, I'm going to have my personal lawyer go in and file a brief against you.
That is an interesting tack and a great out if someone sort of felt like, hey, the heat is just getting too much to stand here. And it has the advantage of coming with the argument of, well, no, I'm doing this because it strengthens the institution, of the presidency and the executive branch. Your argument actually undermines executive power. So what's truly continuity with the institutionalist view of the Justice Department is to undo what you just did in the name of institutionalism, which was wrong.
Right. And I, as master of the executive branch, disagree with what you're doing, and therefore I'm either forbidding you or I am saying to you,
strongly suggesting
through my lawyers in a separate brief, that I disagree with my Justice Department.
Yeah, they're already working on distancing themselves, so I guess.
Well, they already said they don't agree. So, and it makes sense because it shouldn't be agreed with. So just when everybody talks about institutional interest, there is taking an unprecedented step, taking the unprecedented step of certifying a president under the Westfall Act is the opposite of being presidential and consistent. It's just wrong. And I note again that this is Garland doing something to protect his predecessor.
Yes, and that's unattractive enough.
Personal. that's not institutional. When your predecessor breaks precedent, you don't have to defend it. I guess you'll be breaking the precedent of defending it, but I guess, you know what I mean. But and I know this is important, but I would love to discuss on the other side the scope of employment analysis, because that's really what got me.
Yeah, well,
as well.
Sure, absolutely. We can certainly continue it. I know it's dense, but it's important, and it makes sense. And there's a number of levels on which I think it's a pretty big mistake to defend the previous administration as some sort of continuation of, part of the continuum of normal presidencies. So we'll do that.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
But even there, you're talking about his bowling care. Why he did it was obviously not a public issue, but what he said was.
We might as well start back in here because it's time, and we're gonna roll. We don't stop talking during the break.
I'll be quick on the scope of employment thing.
Oh yes, you wanted to return to that, yeah.
Right.
Hi, everyone.
Remember,
we're back.
The idea of the scope of employment is covered by D.C. law. Has this dark responded superior, and the idea is that you, the person who is claiming to be covered in the Westfall Act, need to be acting on behalf of your master.
Yes, that's
all right. So
legal term.
The way we frame it as a president would be, well, is he serving, or in his own mind, serving with regard to his official duties as president? Is what he's doing part of the job that the people of America elected him to do?
Right.
And
was it necessary to address this suit?
The answer is pretty clearly, in this case, it was. It had nothing to do with the job. It had to do with an allegation that he raped a woman 20 years ago. There's no public policy in play. There was no proposals. There's no anything that in any way becomes an argument. Now, the problem that the institutionalists are trying to hang their hats on is there's this really bad case where a D.C. panel of, listen to this lineup, it was Centel, Janice Rogers Brown, and Griffith.
Oh,
three really bad judges. And they wrote a terrible decision. And if you want to see that decision just pulled into a million pieces, read Judge Kaplan's decision on it, because he just destroys it. And it's a terrible, terrible decision.
Which case was
this? The case was called, I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. But anyway, the case I'm talking about is Carroll v. Trump, and you can read about it in the federal court. I'll send you a link that you can put in the post.
Where you'll read Kaplan. Okay, yes.
All right. But anyway, the bottom line is the analysis is you're doing it to serve a master. And there's no way anybody could plausibly claim that he was doing it to serve a master. There's just no colorable argument. There's no Hezbollah. Anyway. There's no Iraq war like there was in the Murtha case or the CARE case that I talked to you about offline.
Yeah, and you should tell everybody about that. But
and it's outrageous, and there's no institutional interest in the presidency or from the Justice Department to make that argument first of all, you're going to embarrass yourself because no one's going to believe that argument. I don't think. I think it's simply not colorable.
That the president is.
Well, they say, well, the D.C. Circuit said the Second Circuit doesn't have to do that. That's
true too.
So they can say, you know what, we disagree. Then go where it goes to the Supreme Court. Well, I would love to see them defend that. I bet they don't.
Maybe.
Do you think they're going to do a Westfall Act case for Trump? Cert denied. I think they've got bigger fish to fry than saving Trump legal fees.
Sure, because it won't happen again.
It'll probably happen again with Trump, but and it could happen again if he's reelected president. But at that point,
I don't know. This guy over here just told me it wouldn't. But okay,
when he's reelected, what he'll do now is just have Carroll arrested and shot. So that'll be that. Oh, you sued me, did you? Well, guess what I did? I arrested you.
Right? Yeah. I mean, at that point, I wouldn't doubt it.
No, seriously, at that point, who's going to sue Trump? I would.
Yeah, it wouldn't be wise.
It would not be wise because let's not bear thinking. We got 3 years before we have to worry about that.
Okay.
So as you can see, the decisions that Garland is making, in my view, are bad. Now, what about the other side? What about policy-wise? Have you heard one single thing about these voter suppression laws from the Justice Department?
I don't think I have. I feel like no. Maybe I have and I've ignored it. But
no, you have not.
Okay. All right, then.
You have not.
That answers it.
And that's not acceptable. What is happening? Why was the Justice Department formed in 1871?
How is Justice Department formed?
Why?
Yes.
Why was it formed?
but we're working on memes here. Why?
To fight, voter suppression by the Ku Klux Klan in the South in 1871.
Okay. Specifically, all right.
Yes.
Okay.
The Ku Klux Klan Act. To enforce the Ku Klux Klan Act, basically, is why it was formed.
Okay. I can.
That's their first mission. What is the prime directive? To go Trekkie on you. So that's what it's about. And what's it doing? Nothing. Instead, it's defending Trump with specious institutional arguments that are not institutional at all.
Maybe it's confused about which side to take on the Ku Klux Klan Act.
Yes, it could be. I mean, David,
still on topic.
I'd love to get your reaction. I just find that there's a real problem here with Merrick Garland.
Well, yeah, it seems to be. And I mean, I guess part of it grows also out of one of Biden's big pledges was that he was going to be hands off about the Justice Department. But that was, of course, with respect to everyone's speculation that the Justice Department would be going after Trump. I don't think anybody asked, will you stay hands off if they actually defend Trump? I mean, he might have said yes. I mean, that's the way the cookie crumbles. What can I do? I'm just the president. But yeah, that's I did not expect it. I see now there's more complaints coming in about things this time. I haven't only read the headline here. Merrick Garland is now defending discrimination against LGBTQ people. In what respect, I'm not sure, but the claim is being made.
I tried to explain it. My shorthand didn't work, but there is an exception for religious freedom from civil rights laws. It's been written in by the Republicans.
I feel that could be anything. Exemptions for religious.
They say the case revolves around LGBTQ who go to conservative Christian colleges. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, no offense to them. Just as a practical matter, maybe you should go college somewhere else.
Sure, but yeah, that's not up to us.
But if you accept federal funds, you are subject to the civil rights laws of the United States.
Sure.
If you are a public accommodation, you are subject to them. And there is what's called the Equality Act that is pending this year, which is to include LGBTQ as a protected class under the civil rights laws, right? Sexual orientation, in essence, being in play. Now, I'm surprised in a sense that would be correct as necessary. And I should actually delve into that because I thought that they were read into Title VII by Gorsuch's decision last year.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Am I wrong?
I don't think I could tell you offhand.
All right, so it's not clear to me. I mean, I understand the Justice Department does have an institutional prescribed role that's been created for them by Congress to defend federal laws in federal court. So in theory, they're defending federal law. Though I think now that I think it through aloud here on air with you is, well, I think that plausibly they could have argued that in light of the Gorsuch decision on Title VII, that this position no longer holds, and therefore we think that these actions are prohibited.
That so
maybe
right about
LGBTQ people can educate me on why that hasn't happened.
But there are also previous examples of federal government changing its position and declining to defend. At some it's rarity, DOMA but it has happened.
Yeah, they declined to defend DOMA, as you recall.
Yeah.
And that was a thing that institutionally, was a departure.
Yeah. It does
merited one, and I think that the reality is you could have make the argument that this is one that probably could have gone the same way. It was sort of an arcane case because it's not the Baker's case. Mm-hmm. I think the conservative Christian college thing maybe had some impact. I don't know, but it's certainly Merrick Garland is not going out of his way to defend Biden policy positions in the Justice Department, even where plausibly he could. But he has gone out of his way to defend Trump and Barr more specifically, and for things that are really indefensible. And as I laid them out, I think that the biggest problem I have is little commitment to a Justice Department within its parameters, enforcing the laws that it was created for, and going out of its way to defend a disgraceful and corrupt predecessor and president for no good reason.
Yeah.
Who's making those decisions? That's why I'm asking. Do you think there's a failure of leadership here? What's going on?
I don't know for sure, obviously, who's making the actual decisions, and I assume that at some level they're reviewed. I don't know that they're all reviewed by the Attorney General. They now will be because they've risen to the level where it's in the papers and he's going to start getting calls. But I imagine even without that, some of those cases are reviewed by him. And I mean, he certainly is an institutionalist. He was a pretty conservative guy for somebody that Democrats were ever interested in elevating. He always was. He's not a conservative, capital C conservative, but,
Yeah, he's yes, absolutely. He's on the Breyer side of things, not the I guess Sotomayor or Ruth Bader Ginsburg side of things, if you want to look at it that way. But that goes beyond this. This is stuff that, I just question his leadership. Those again, he did not have to make any decision. The trial courts had ruled. You know what? We're done. We'll leave it there. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
It wasn't like he had to make the initial decision. They said, hey, you know what? The other guy did these decisions and he lost, and that's that.
Yeah. It is possible to just simply say, well, that's the way it goes. They could just let the trial court have handled
They had their day in court. They lost. We have finite resources. We can't litigate every case.
Right. However, if you work for the appellate division, you
appeal everything, I guess.
Yeah. What do you mean this? Although, at some point, there are certainly people in appellate that would say, I wouldn't mind being done with one of these. Let's not create work. There are plenty of appeals we have to work on.
Without mentioning names, and I'm assuming and hoping he's not involved. This Second Circuit, even though Trump put a lot of people in, I just think that it's such an implausible situation. I don't know how you write around Kaplan's opinion. I mean, he wrote very well, as opposed to the other decisions on. They just didn't. They were, frankly, half-assed, the opinions. This guy wrote a thorough opinion where he did the legislative history. He looked at what was going on, the Nixon investigation. None of those opinions take anywhere near the level of work that this judge did. Mm-hmm. So to overturn it without it, having a lot of people like Robbie Kaplan screaming, you got to come up with some really good stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I also briefly gave some consideration to the possibility of, I don't know, like, maybe they feel obligated to go forward with an appeal, but they're prepared to lose the appeal, or they'll put some sort of, maybe not their best foot forward, but, why bother with something like that? Why not just simply say, we don't appeal. This is okay.
Now, mind you, the Trump case in New York, Trump's lawyers are arguing for him. They can make all the arguments. You could just say, you know what, we're neutral on this. We're just backing out. If Mr. Trump's lawyers succeed on appeal, obviously we'll respect that and step back in. But right now, we're just going to stand aside.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I don't know. There's not much to get. Although, here's something else I had, by the way, in case you're, I just thought I'll trigger you with this thing. I don't know if you happen to see this. This is off topic, but you began by asking, when you asked, what are they doing about defending against voter suppression, or aren't there other things? What other issues could they be championing and putting out front? And we don't see a whole lot just yet. But I sent you last night. I just sort of, did the CC.
Oh, the Electoral Count Act thing?
Yeah. Was that of interest to you?
Yeah, what can I tell you? I screamed about it then. I screamed about it now, and nobody listens. Now, listen, at this point, that is still a huge issue.
This is, by the way, just to fill everybody in, as I just sent him Glenn Kessler's tweet from yesterday saying, anyone know why a standalone reform of the Electoral Count Act, the fuzziness of which led Trump to think that the VP could have a role in determining the winner, has not yet been on the agenda for Congress, or somehow litigated somewhere, I suppose. But yeah, you've been talking about that a lot, and I wondered whether you.
Yeah, obviously, I think that Section 15 of the Electoral Count Act has to be removed. It's inconsistent. The law doesn't. It's not fuzziness. It's a complete contradiction. If things are final and conclusive, you don't get to object to things that are final and conclusive.
Yeah.
Now, we have a bigger problem now, which is the certification process in the states. And the fact that, look, all the voter suppression things are problematic, but procedurally, the states, by the Constitution, don't even have to have elections for president. So, but once they establish that right, of course, then they have to follow through with it, and they can't change the rules after the results, or after they don't like the results, or whatever the case may be. And that's now, the problem will be, well, thank God at least for the next 2 years, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, they can't change the law. Because we have Democratic governors. But if we lose all three, which I suspect we won't, but we could.
Right.
Certainly Wisconsin is always very difficult. Michigan goes back and forth, though, I'm hopeful there. And Wolf has been pretty strong in Pennsylvania, so I'm assuming he will run again for a third term, hopefully. But Arizona and Georgia, Kemp, Kemp's gonna do whatever next time if he wins. If not, it'll be somebody worse.
Yeah.
And then of course Jody Heiss, that crazy Georgia congressman, is running for Secretary of State against Raffensperger.
Right. Explicitly to cheat.
So, in Arizona, I don't know what to make of there. So, but, we have to look at the total numbers, and I think that there is an issue there. But the Electoral Count Act is where it all ends up. And it's as simple as they need to excise Section 15. If you do nothing else and say, just repeal Section 15, that's the section that creates the objection process for Congress people. That's why there was a January 6th. That's why they thought Pence could reject certified votes. Mm-hmm. He couldn't. Constitutionally, he couldn't. I mean, this is the whole thing. Section 15 is in violation of the United States Constitution, the 12th Amendment. Obviously, no one's going to go to court for declaratory judgment on it, but that's just a reality. And if you could only do one thing, just repeal Section 15.
All right. Yeah, but we've seen no action on it and no indication that anybody's
going to
make that a priority.
I don't know what's going on in Congress these days. How come there's no investigations of January 6th? I mean, I know they wanted their big commission. They didn't get it, but so what? You still have committees. And you need to start issuing subpoenas now because it can take 4 years to get the thing answered.
That's true. No doubt about that. You can't. The subpoena process will never work quickly enough.
Yeah, Don McGahn was deposed supposedly, or testified to Nadler.
Eventually,
nobody cared.
Right.
I don't know if it was behind closed doors. I don't know if it was testified. I don't know anything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's, I guess, the problem. There's that lack of interest in it now because even the media covering it knows what good is this going to do, really, at this point?
Well, it's not going to do any good, but frankly, if Trump's still a player, I'm surprised they didn't get more coverage. But, just 1/6 is the thing that I don't get. And what is Congress doing? I'm sure they're doing something. I don't know what it is. They certainly don't. If they're having hearings, I'm not hearing about them. And I guess this is back to pre-Trump, I guess, when we didn't hear about hearings so much. Yeah.
I guess. I mean, right now, I think the House is still in recess, and I guess the action moves to the House because, the commission idea, for whatever it was worth, defeated in the Senate. There's still action that can take place and things we ought to be doing with it. But everybody said, all right, well, the two alternatives now are either the presidential commission or for the House to create its own, everyone pointed to select committee. It doesn't have to be, but whatever. Okay, a special purpose, essentially, committee to conduct an investigation that the House, by virtue of being in the hands of a majority of Democrats, can, presumably, if they don't lose any votes along the way somehow, create this committee and populate it however they see fit, at least from the Democratic side. And why aren't they doing it? And I don't know that they aren't. It's just that I think they've been in recess since that became the reality. So they may come back and they may come roaring back and do it. And, of course, then, you have this discussion on Twitter and, why don't they call them back from recess? I don't know. They just don't do things like that.
People, you know what I would do, actually, on the commission thing? Yeah, I know they don't do the recess thing. But I was just thinking about the commission thing.
Yeah.
I think I'd do the best of both worlds. I would create that select committee for the subpoena power. Then I'd pass they could do their own report, but they should pass all their materials over to a presidential commission. And let them write their own conclusions.
That's a thought.
You know why? Because the press will say, that's just Congress, and be minority reports and majority reports and all this silly shit. Oops. And they will, but if you get it from, Tom Keane and...
Not the younger one.
Yeah, the old one. And
how old
Lee Hamilton, all of a sudden, this is serious.
Right. Why, they are serious statesmen. Or they were.
You know what I mean? I feel like that would be the way I would spin it. Said, Congress, in fact, they'll never do it, but if Congress was smart, they said, listen, we're just going to gather the information, and we're going to leave it to you to write the report. We're not going to get involved. That way you don't even let the Republicans write a minority report.
Yeah. Okay, that's true. That's a good work.
That would never happen, but it's that's how I would do it.
Okay. Yeah.
I cannot believe you reminded me of that GSA thing. Oh.
Well, it has implications. You got to be careful with these things, and you can't declare that the president is a mere employee of the federal government, or under GSA rules, he's now ineligible to be the leaseholder on the old post office pavilion where the Trumps redeveloped the property into the hotel. So, boom, done. Which of course was the argument to begin with. And yeah, the defense was, well, the president is a different kind of person. He's not a government employee.
Exactly.
Right.
He's a branch of government.
Right. Totally different. Well, that's interesting, because I'd like to bring this over now. Can I subpoena the GSA administrator and get that statement reread into the record in this Westfall certification? The other part of the, this is like bringing in the letters to Santa Claus in Miracle on 34th Street. Well, now, how can that be? Because the GSA administrator, well, all right, that's not a very important person, but...
It really is. I mean, unfortunately, people don't remember. 4.5 years ago, more or less, probably January 21st, 2017, somewhere around that date.
This is our job to remember this. Yes.
David Waldman and I discussed the need, by the terms of the agreement of the lease, to cancel the Trump lease for that hotel. And some GSA administrator wrote some hullabaloo and said, oh, well, he's not going to receive the profits till after he's out of the presidency. Therefore, it's okay. What?
Yeah. Well, that was one thing. Right. And
then, he's not covered because he's not an employee.
Sure. Yeah. But meanwhile, right. So the right hand of the government says he's not an employee. The left hand of the government says he is an employee when necessary. So, yeah, that's pretty good. And by the way,
I guess Calvin Ball writ large.
He's now, of course, trying to the Trump organization wants very badly to sell the hotel. It's of no use to them anymore. They can't collect bribes there, which I guess also tells you something about the comeback plan. I'll be reinstated in August, but I sold the hotel. I'm running again, but I'm selling the hotel. Yeah, sure. All right, whatever. Lara's running for Senate. Nah, she's not. Ivanka's running for Senate. She isn't. I'm starting my own platform. I'm not, over and over and over. But yeah, I guess now they say they're going to sell it. And so now they can come back and argue, but remember the argument that it won't happen again, right? So we were right about that. We sold the hotel.
Oh, my God.
These guys take you around in circles. But
everything you just said.
That's our job, remembering.
Circles me back to the fact Merrick Garland doesn't understand the seriousness of the situation. Trump is still out there.
Yes. Well, that's true. I don't know what Garland understands about it and doesn't. No one can read him. He doesn't say much, and probably with good reason. I hope he understands it, but he doesn't demonstrate it.
My understanding was he was testifying to Congress today or tomorrow. I don't know.
Oh, well, then we'll find out.
I hope so. He might invoke the deliberative process.
That's
privilege.
right. I'm sorry. It's inappropriate for me to comment on that. There's ongoing litigation. Well, I will say that. Litigation. I'm sorry. What's the point of calling the Attorney General for testimony if he can never testify about ongoing litigation? I mean, that's your job, is to do the litigation on an ongoing basis. We'd like to ask how it's going. Oh, right. Well,
I can't remember. Well, I do remember when Holder was called for Fast and Furious or some nonsense. Remember?
Yes.
And I guess he answered questions, but Holder was more of a politician type, so he liked talking. Well, Barr talked. But it was sort of in hypotheticals, and if the president offered pardons as to have people not testify,
right,
that would certainly be obstruction.
Sure. We're not going to charge him with it.
Yeah, it's obstruction, but when the president does it, it's okay.
Yes, right. Well, and also Westfall. We ordered him to
Westfall. We would have been Westfall on the pardons.
Mike Pence told him to do it. So that's why you need to hang him. I'm just saying. It all comes together in the end.
There
well,
you go.
yeah.
There you go.
Look,
it won't happen again if they hug. That's for sure.
I really need to get that clip from the old Simpsons of Chief Wiggum saying that. I want to maybe remember that, but it won't happen again. Anyway, time for us to wrap it up. Sure. Thanks for doing the show.
Nobody cares about. All right. Talk to you later.
I appreciate it. We will talk again. And now time for us to let Justice Putnam do the talking, of course. I didn't get to do as much today, and it was kind of pleasant, though I might prefer to have napped through the whole thing. Physically, I really enjoyed the stimulation mentally. And now I'm exhausted, so it's time to turn the microphone over, as I said, to Justice Putnam to pick things up for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what we missed out on while we were concentrating on our hobby horses, as it were. Let's see. For nearly 3 years, this is a great story. An encrypted app used by criminals was covertly monitored by the FBI and Australia's federal police, and as I understand it, was actually developed, operated, and maintained by them the whole time, too. But I don't want to spoil the story. I hope that's not... Well, we'll find out more. Stay tuned for all the details on that. I had it tucked away. Now Justice has to take care of it. Thanks, Armando.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Of course, it couldn't just be Armando's fault. It would have to be Greg's fault as well. But what better way to spend a Wednesday, quite honestly. And for those of you who enjoy having other voices in your ear, it was a perfect day, I'm sure. We'll be back on Thursday. Greg will be back with me as well. I'll sum up for now and then hand it over. See you tomorrow.